that we have looked at planning of your lesson yesterday. We looked at key areas that you can incorporate when planning and preparing for your lesson. Yes, you have planned your lesson plan. You have come up with key areas on an active learning. You have put in all the three domains, both the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective aspects in your lesson plan. How then do you go ahead and deliver the lesson plan to your learners? And therefore, that informs our today's session on effective lesson delivery. Our session objectives today, we are going to mainly look at use of questioning to promote high levels of participation and thinking. How to effectively model the key concepts. So to start us off, I want us to have a reflection activity. Think about a teacher who inspired you as a child. This could be someone who made learning fun, who made you feel, really, this is the real deal. And I know majority of you still recall that teacher. So in the chat section, kindly put in your responses. You can share the name of the teacher if you still remember the teacher. You could also maybe share that one thing that made you love the teacher, that made you feel valued in the classroom. So in the next 1 minute or so, let's hear those your memorable journey when you were a young boy or girl in school. I want to see if some of you still remember. Tell us why you still. Any responses? Remember, I've said, remember that, who is that one teacher you can remember in your childhood? And what is that one specific thing that made their teaching effective or memorable until now you can still remember them? If your response is coming in the chat section, I'll sample out a few. Aha. Here we go. We have Irene telling me, Madam Nelima at Bomo Primary School. She made us create storybook from story cutout in Sunday Daily Nation. That must have been a very good teacher, Irene. Madam Nelima at Bomo Primary School. Wherever she is, shout outs to her. She made Irene Kuria create storybook from story cutouts in the Sunday Daily Nation of that teacher. Mrs. Onyango, that is Margarita Opio's teacher on the board. And I loved her eloquence. She made me love English. I hope you're a teacher of English, Margarita Opio. Madam Virginia Matiro says, Mr. Haundi, class 1, used to teach us using vernacular counting. Okay. Robert says, Robert Lawi Onyango from, no, that is attendance. Another of us says, Teacher Esther, I really enjoyed the way she used to sing. Amy Wambia says, Teacher Doreen, she could involve all learners during lessons. Anne Bosbori says, Mr. Peter, my head teacher primary, a man who understood me that I am short-sighted, and he helped me see the blackboard by writing big handwritings, big up my mwalimu. Wow. That's a teacher who made an inclusive class for this lady Anne. Lydia Gashungu, my English language. Thanks to my teacher. Keep them coming, and so many more still coming in. So what is it that we are looking at? All these aspects of a teacher who made your school life memorable. These qualities align very well with what we call teacher competencies, as they are required for effective lesson delivery. And in today's world, in today's classroom, these competencies are still valued to the learner. And therefore, as a teacher who is going to deliver a lesson effectively, what competencies must you have? The first competency as a teacher, you must be able to turn mistakes into learning moments. You should be able to view student errors as valuable opportunities to deepen understanding and enhance learning. You must also use diverse approaches and methods. In other words, you need to incorporate a range of teaching strategies that meet different learning needs. Provide application opportunities where learners have a chance to apply core concepts in practical, meaningful ways. You should also promote engagement and critical thinking. In other words, as a teacher, you need to select methods that encourage all learners to think critically and actively participate in the class activities. And also, you also need to model key concepts. That means you are what comprehension of the learners. And then you must also utilize what we call strategic questioning, where as a teacher, as an effective teacher, you are using questions to reinforce and extend and clarify those key learning points. And to help us engage and improve active learning in our classroom, we can maximize what we call the think participation ratio. The think participation ratio. Yes, we have done lesson planning. Planning can be one thing, but it also requires careful and skillful execution of that lesson plan. You can have the best lesson plan, but if the execution of the lesson plan is poor, then we don't have meaningful learning. And therefore, to maximize learning, you as a teacher must carefully choose strategies and methodologies that promote high levels of thinking and participation. When there is a high participation and high thinking, it enhances active learning and therefore maximizes learning in general. When you look at that infographic that is on the board on your screen, think of that quadrant talking about low thinking and low participation. The red, low thinking, low participation. Approaches you take as a teacher in the class or participation in the classroom at all. For example, you as a teacher, you might end up overusing the lecture method, the chalk and talk method. What are the risks? You risk losing student engagement, and that does not challenge the learner at all. The learners are more basically passive in the learning process. Remember, we talked about active and passive learning yesterday. When you are choosing approaches that promote high thinking and low participation, that is the yellow quadrant, high thinking, high participation and low, rather high thinking and low participation, the green quadrant. The approaches that you choose will promote these high thinking capabilities among the learners, but with low participation. An example for this case would be you are asking a learner to come to the board to solve a problem. That one student among the 50 or the 60 is low participation, is having to apply high levels of thinking individually. And therefore, you realize that here, some learners are actively engaged, but the majority are passive. When it comes to quadrant number 3, where we have high participation, low thinking, that is the yellow quadrant, high participation, low thinking, the approaches that you choose as a teacher to promote this high participation and low thinking, they do not challenge learners to think very much. And we often, as teachers, fall into this trap when in fact there is minimal learning happening. A classic example for this case would be where we normally use rhetoric questions, such as, are we together, class? Are we at par? Is that okay? Or basically using some basic recall questions, or maybe a describing word, which is an adjective, a describing word like what. So these questions require basic answers that almost becomes a conditioned or an automated response mechanism. What's your name? What is matter? Yes, we have high participation, but low thinking. And therefore, learners are not actively engaged in learning as they are not required to think deeply. The ultimate approaches that you as a teacher should be able to promote high thinking and high participation. This is what we call the magic area, the blue quadrant. This is where learning is maximized and the learners are participating and challenged to engage in higher levels of thinking. An example would be the use of paired discussion, think, pair, and share, where everyone must be engaged and with carefully crafted discussion questions. We promote high-level thinking. Another example maybe for this section would be independent work, where every learner is engaged, highly participating, and having to apply learning that or applying a concept that the teacher has explained to solve that individualistic work. So in this quadrant, active learning is being promoted. Process. So I want us to think of scenarios and be able to respond in the chat section. Scenarios surrounding the think participation ratio. So our first scenario here, we have you as a teacher having taught a lesson on, let's say, multiplication, and as the final part of the lesson, you set an exercise with 3 long multiplication questions. Then you ask students or learners to work individually to answer each question. And as they work, you as a teacher, you move around the class to provide support where needed. Where do you think this scenario applies? Does it apply on high participation, low thinking, low participation, low thinking, high participation, high thinking, or low participation, low thinking? Where do you think this scenario 1 would fit? Where the teacher after teaching a lesson on multiplication, gives 3 long questions for the learners to do in the exercise books. And as they do, the teacher is walking around to check on individual students' work. In the chat section, where does scenario 1 come in? In which quadrant? Remember, we are referring to this. High participation, low thinking, or high thinking, high participation. Remember, we said our sweet spot as educators is the high thinking, high participation spot. Keep them coming in the chat section. Scenario 1, what does it reflect on? Vida, are there some responses?
Yes. Grace say, I think high participation. I think high thinking and high participation. Charles Auma says high thinking, low participation. Dottie says high participation, low thinking. Doreen says high thinking, low participation. Irene Kuria says high thinking, low participation. Grace Wairimu says, since all learners are involved in the individual work. Bernard Momanyi says, high thinking, low participation. And yeah, there are more of them coming.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vida. So, colleagues, we need to re-understand this scenario. You as a teacher, you have taught on a concept. You have given individual work. The learners are working out. And you as a teacher, you are checking on individual students' work. Is there participation? Yes, high participation. Why? Each learner is engaged in working out. Is there high thinking? Yes, there is high thinking. Why? The learner is applying the concept you have taught on multiplication to solve the 3 questions that you gave. So the learner is highly thinking because of applying the concept taught, and there is high participation because it is all the learners who are actively engaged because each learner is doing their own work. Now, when you look at task 2, now let us be a bit careful on there. A teacher is teaching about punctuation and is explaining what an exclamation mark is. She then writes an exclamation mark on the chalkboard and says, "This is what?" Then the students all respond, "An exclamation mark." The teacher repeats, "It is a what?" And the students jointly answer again, "An exclamation mark," in a chorus. Where do you categorize this? Again, with reference to our think pair ratio, think participation ratio. Where do you classify that?
Okay, so Anne says low thinking. Charles says high participation, but low thinking. Robert says low thinking and low participation. Grace says low thinking and high participation. Yeah.
All right. Despite all the students answering in a chorus, answering the question in a chorus, students do not have to think very hard to answer this question. So high levels of thinking are not promoted. But again, when students answer questions in unison or chorus, you cannot be able to ascertain that each learner thought about the answer before saying it. Some learners might be influenced to say an exclamation mark when they hear the others saying the answer. Again, here there is low thinking and there is also low participation. These other two scenarios again, we shall quickly go over them. Scenario 3, you as a life skills teacher, you are teaching about healthy relationships. You divide students into groups of 4 and ask them to come up with a role play to demonstrate examples of healthy and unhealthy relationships in a home environment. You as a life skills teacher, you are teaching about healthy relationships. You divide students into groups of 4, ask them to come up with a role play to demonstrate examples of healthy and unhealthy relationships in the home environment. Which think participation ratio does this? Participation, high thinking. High participation, low thinking. Low participation, high thinking, or low participation and low thinking. And scenario 4, the teacher asks many questions throughout his lesson to get students thinking. Each time he asks a question, the same 5 or 6 students raise their hands and he always calls on one of them. What will that be? So for scenario 3 and 4, the teacher is asking a couple of questions throughout the lesson. And each time, 5 to 6 students raise their hands, and he's always speaking on any of the 6 or any of the 5. In what quadrant of participation quadrant does it fall? So in scenario 3, we can comfortably say that this think participation ratio is high participation, high thinking. Why? Students working in small groups promotes high levels of engagement, and creating a role play requires students to apply their learning in a way that requires high levels of thought. And therefore, the teacher could support participation and thinking further, probably by moving around the groups to ensure groups are on tasks and challenging them with questions about their role play or maybe feedback on how they could improve, and thereby promoting high levels of thinking. For scenario 4, low participation, high thinking, with only 5 or 6 students answering, participation is very low. Obviously, out of maybe the 50 or 60 learners, only 5 or 6 is very high. So this is something many teachers fall into, and the more it is done, the more risks disengaging the other students and reducing participations and thinking for the rest of the class. You've heard of classes saying the teacher is only concentrating on the best performers and the rest of us have been left out. Yes, this is where most of us fall into that trap. You have your favorite class learners who are very sharp, quick to raise their hand, quick to answer questions. And when they answer, you assume everybody knows. So we must be careful to know that. Let us not fall into the trap here. Remember, later on in this training on Friday, we shall be looking at creating inclusive learning environments. So what are some of the things you should do as a teacher to have an inclusive classroom environment that accommodates every individual learner's needs? And therefore, the classroom being a dynamic environment that brings together students from different backgrounds with various abilities and personalities. To be an effective teacher, therefore, you must be able to implement creative and innovative teaching strategies in order to meet students' individual needs. As a teacher, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So here, a range of effective teaching strategies you can use to inspire your classroom practice. So what are some of these effective classroom teaching methods and approaches that, as a teacher, you can employ? One of the most adored approach is the learner-centered approach, which we looked at yesterday briefly. So where in this approach, it tailors learning to creating an environment where the learners are actively involved in constructing their own knowledge through hands-on collaborative activities. And a perfect example in such an approach would be where you can use individual projects that allow students to explore their favorite animals, rather by drawing or researching with the teacher supporting them and sharing with the class. When you tell a grade 2 learner, which is your favorite pet, draw it, they'll go do research on the pet. If it's a cat, they will need to know a cat has 4 legs, a long tail, it has the whiskers, short ears. When they are researching and asking their parents, maybe at home, how their cats look like, you are promoting this learner-centered approach. You, as a teacher, you can also be able to use group activities in, let's say, storytelling, where each student adds a part to the story. I remember what one of the ladies wrote and said, they recall their teacher who made them create a storybook by cutting newspaper stories and sticking them in the book. Yes, this is one way of ensuring that you have a learner-centered approach. The goal of all this learner-centered approach is to encourage active engagement where the learners are part of their learning process and promoting curiosity and teamwork. Another very good approach here is what we call the competence-based approach, where most of us are based on this competence-based framework that we have as a country. This approach focuses not only knowledge, but also skills and attitudes. For example, literacy and numeracy competencies. Instead of just teaching the alphabet, the learner can practice sounding out letters, then matching the sounds to images, and then moving on to simple word formation. You can also incorporate physical skills, for example, where learning to jump a rope or catch a ball in a PE lesson, the students will learn to practice and demonstrate mastery before advancing. The main goal of this approach, competence-based approach, is to develop specific competencies through hands-on practice, and learners are assessed on set standards before moving forward, making learning experience practical and purposeful. The third effective delivery approach that we can employ as teachers is what we call technology-centered instruction, or teacher-centered instruction. But I must caution, this is a more traditional approach where most of us are coming from, and we shouldn't continuously be using this method. Yes, it can be blended with these other approaches we are looking at, but we discourage a lot where the teacher or the teacher is the subject matter expert here, is the center or the source of the knowledge. We also call this approach instructor-led learning. So the teacher as the expert is the one delivering the knowledge to passive students with very limited interaction. Examples would include direct instruction, for example, to sound out letters with learners listening and practicing together afterwards. Say ah, they say ah. Say mama, they say mama. Say father, they say father. That is a more like instructor-led approach, which is kind of a didactic lesson for calling that. We can call it that. Another example here could be maybe if you're a science teacher and you're teaching a science concept, like let's say the life cycle of a grasshopper. Yeah. You as the teacher, you're explaining each stage with images and the students respond with questions. The goal for this instructor-led approach, the style mainly includes question and answer to reinforce understanding, but relies primarily on a structured instruction rather than an interactive one. So as I've said, this is a method that we shouldn't really be very keen on employing in our day-to-day teaching and learning. We also have what we call the technology-enhanced approach. This approach integrates digital tools and resources into teaching and learning, offering students interactive and engaging ways to explore content. Technology-enhanced method can help early grade learners gain foundational digital skills, making learning more accessible and allowing for personalized pacing and feedback. A very good example is what we are doing currently in our competence-based curriculum, the aspect on digital literacy, where every substrand has a digital learning activity. Yeah, teachers can use the whiteboards. You can use that for hands-on activities like maybe sorting shapes or matching numbers, for example. And students can be able to drag and place objects. This makes the lesson more visual and engaging, especially for those schools that have resources to acquire such digital devices. But even using the government-provided tablets, there are some sites that you can get gamified learning, right? Kahoot, for example. And you can even find some simple math and literacy apps like the ABC Mouse or the Stafford, which allows students to practice counting, letter recognition, or phonics through play. This reinforces their concept in an enjoyable way. We can also use things like digital storybooks. Yeah. There is a very huge digital library we call Fantastic Phonics. Fantastic Phonics is a free digital library that has millions and millions of digital storybooks where children can use online platforms to engage with storytelling, listening at their own pace, and repeating after the avatar within that digital storytelling context. And this helps the students to interact with illustrations and even create their own digital books to share with classmates. Another aspect of digital teaching, of technology-enhanced approach, you can organize virtual field trips. Yeah, bringing the real-world experiences into the classroom. Or historical sites can make learning very memorable. In general, the goal for technology-enhanced approach for early grades is to introduce technology in a developmentally appropriate way, supporting learning goals and making lessons more accessible, relevant, and interactive. So what are some of the teaching tools that can enhance engagement in our classroom? The most used technique or tool is the questioning technique or tool. Questioning is one of the most powerful teaching tools a teacher can use, but only if the questions are carefully planned ahead of time and well executed in the classroom. The three techniques can be used together, where you can ask a question, allow wait time, and then use cold call to select a student to answer, and then ask them to stretch their answer. This technique is also known as the wait, cold, call, stretch it technique. The wait, cold, call, stretch it technique. What does it entail? What is in the wait? What is in the call? What is in the stretch? The wait time is basically the time a teacher gives between asking a question and asking for an answer. Yes, you have asked a question. Do you ask a question, then ask an answer? Our times of learning those years, back in the early 80s and 90s, we had outside the classroom. We used to call it mental arithmetic. They start asking the question before even they get in class, and they expect you as a learner, you are ready with the answer by the time they get in class. Of course, those days, corporal punishment and all that. So we used to get scared. When you see a mathematics teacher leaving the staff room, you prop your ears in readiness, because any question can come before even the teacher gets to class. We used to call it mental arithmetic. But was it meaningful? Was there meaningful learning there? It was more scary, because you just want to get the question, do it and give the answer so that you don't get the cane on your back. So the wait time is that time a teacher gives between asking a question and taking an answer. When you increase the wait time by just a few seconds, it helps to improve the quantity and the quality of answers by allowing time for the learners to think and respond. It also allows an opportunity for all the learners to develop an answer. And when an answer is taken too soon, some students have not had time to think about the answer or to think about the question. And over time, they may become discouraged to formulate answers on assumption that someone else will be asked first. You see what that does? When you don't give time, the wait time between asking a question and getting the answer. What is cold call? Cold call is the action of calling on students. The action of calling on students, regardless of whether they have raised their hands to answer a question. It keeps students very alert and means that all students to ask all the questions and all that. So when students are aware that they may be asked to answer a question, regardless of whether they had put their hand up, it always generates motivation to have an answer ready. And this promotes high levels of thinking and participation among the students. And lastly, the stretch it as a technique that gets students to expand on their answers. It pushes learners to think more about their answer and pushes them to higher levels of thinking, critical thinking for that matter, and learning. When students are challenged to stretch their answer, it requires them to think more deeply about it, and this promotes high levels of thinking. You remember the Bloom's taxonomy, cognitive skills, where now we have the analysis level, the creation level, the evaluation level, because the student is being asked to think more about the answer that he's going to give. And this challenges them and pushes them to learn further. Another technique that we can use as teachers is what we call collaborative and cooperative learning. Collaborative and cooperative learning. When we use collaborative work in our class as a tool for learning, It helps the learners to feel part, to own their planning. They feel they belong, a sense of belonging. Talk of a collaborative technique like group work, for example. Group work can facilitate learners to take ownership of the subject matter, develop teamwork and communication skills, and learners can also be able to explore key concepts with the support of their peers. We call it peer learning before being expected to apply independence in terms of their learning. There's what we call the I do, we do, you do. So in peer group work, learners are able to experiment the we do part before they can go to the I do part, which brings about independence in the way their learning takes place. So this helps them in understanding and building what we call individual confidence. Students and learners can also work together and pool their knowledge and skills, and they can teach and learn from each other. Group work also allows the teacher to move around and check for understanding and provide what we call tailored support where needed. Of course, we have other cooperative learning techniques or approaches, such as peer teaching. What is peer teaching? Learners teach each other. This can help to reinforce their understanding and build confidence. It helps learners to process information actively and give them ownership in their learning. Talk of think, pair, and share technique, another collaborative learning approach, where we have a structured approach where the students and the learners think individually, discuss with a partner, and then share with the larger group. This can be you let the learners think on their own, pair up with their deskmate, discuss what they have thought about, and then share with the larger class of what their thoughts are to the question that you've asked. So what must we consider when doing group work as a technique? There are quite a number of things that we must consider. One of the key elements of the group work approach, you must consider the group size. If a group is too large, it risks some learners disengaging and not participating in the task at all. The best way to do group work is to pair work, where you have fewer learners or a learner pairing with each other, which helps to engage all the learners, ensuring 100% participation. And it's a great way that can bring about quick discussions, brainstormings, and focused problem solving. For larger tasks, small groups of between 4 and 8 learners allow learners to collectively complete a project or a task. There are many factors you can also use to organize groups, including organizing groups based on ability. This one now what we call the group dynamics as another factor to consider when you're creating groups. You can organize groups in terms of ability-based grouping, where you have same ability students are allowed for differentiated tasks, where each group works at their own pace. You have low achievers, you have time takers, you have gifted learners, and then you give differentiated tasks. The task you give the low achievers is not the same task you're going to give the gifted. So this allows for each individual groups to move at their own pace. You can also consider mixed ability groups, which encourages peer support with higher performing students assisting those who may find the content challenging. So you have a group that has 2 gifted learners, 2 average learners, and 2 probably low achievers. You can also have gender-based grouping, girls in one group. This breaks down the barriers and fosters what we call inclusivity within the classroom. But you can also consider separate gender groups in cases where, like, very sensitive topics, e.g., let's say puberty or reproductive health. Grouping by gender can create a comfortable space for open discussion. We also have what you can call age-based grouping. Age-based grouping, you can think of mixed age, which can be beneficial for tasks at the same level, where older students might support younger learners. You can have same age grouping for appropriate tasks where different life experiences are significant, recognizing that older students may bring diverse perspective. I mean, a certain group that is engaged in whether to have boys circumcised at this year or not. And these are some of the dynamics that are coming up. What will happen to the boys that are circumcised when they go back to school, and those that are not circumcised? So this is kind of the dilemma that we are in as a country, especially this transition period, when the boys are changing from grade 8 to grade 9. Some other things to consider when you are coming up with groups is for you to have what we call clear tasks and goals. The group work should align with lesson objectives, guiding students towards specific learning outcomes and clearly defining the group tasks for discussion. This helps to generate ideas or solve problems or apply concepts. For example, you might set a goal like creating a story together. So the students understand the objective of this discussion or this group work is to create a story together. Learner contributes. Participation should be at 100%. And that, the only way you can do that is by assigning roles, e.g., in a group, you can pick the secretary, you can pick who will be presenting, you will pick who is be the team leader. But as much as possible, encourage all students to take notes and be prepared to present. So don't rule out completely you are the one to present. No, leave it open so that everybody can participate 100%, knowing that I can be picked anytime to present. This will keep the learners engaged, and you can also do so by rotating responsibilities to ensure that every learner is engaged. Mix up the groupings is another approach. What to consider when doing group work. Rotate groups regularly to keep activities engaging and expose students to different perspectives. You could use factors like ability, gender, and age to create new dynamic groups so that everybody is actively engaged. And finally, something else to consider in group work is you must manage the group feedback. Efficiency in feedback saves time. Have only the select groups to share or ask each group to present one main point without disregarding the other groups. You must focus on group value by emphasizing the learning in group discussions rather than prolonged presentations, keeping the session engaging and time efficient. So what are the benefits, challenges, and teacher support during cooperative learning? Cooperative learning essentials require proper planning and preparation. A successful cooperative learning requires organizing diverse, heterogeneous groups based on characteristics that we have mentioned under the group dynamics. When you're assigning tasks, for example, each student should receive a specific role contributing to the group's overall goal, which promotes accountability and collaboration. The benefit here would be skill building, which encourages students to develop teamwork and collaborative skills valuable for future workforce and readiness. Peer support also is a benefit for this, where students support each other and therefore creating an inclusive environment where they can share strength and grow together. But of course, it doesn't go without challenges. Teachers, we sometimes have challenges in managing groups. For instance, how do you manage individual preferences? There are some students or learners who may prefer working alone. Which students are introverted, which students are extroverted, which students like doing it alone, which students like working in groups. We also have challenge on diverse abilities, where we have some gifted learners may feel challenged working with peers that are less gifted or time takers. So the less advanced students may also feel intimidated that nimewekwa na chopi, I've been put in the best group, I don't know anything. So you also need to balance that. So your role as a teacher, you need to monitor those group dynamics and provide guidance to ensure all students feel comfortable, supported, and engaged. Another key technique or approach that can help improve student engagement is what we call scaffolding. This involves breaking learning into manageable steps, each supported by a structured guidance. Scaffolding provides clarity and builds comprehension gradually. For example, if you are, let's say, teaching literacy, you as an English teacher or a language teacher, you want to model reading a story aloud, guiding learners in identifying the keywords or sounds. Example 2, for instance, if you're a mathematics teacher, you break down a word problem into smaller steps while supporting the learners through each stage. Problem solving is also another aspect you can use under this scaffolding, where you ask guiding questions to help students explore different solutions to a puzzle or to modeling, which is basically a demonstration of the task or skill, and you provide an example for a student or a learner to follow. At first, you have to model. Then the other aspect is you provide what you call guided practice, where you provide hints, feedback, or assistance as the student tries the task. This helps to bridge the gap between current abilities and the learning goals. The third aspect is gradual release of responsibility, where now you as a teacher, you are allowing the student to move from the teacher-led to student-led task. The student takes on more responsibility as their skill improves. And then you bring in the questioning, where now you're encouraging critical thinking and reflection. This helps the learner to process information and make a connection. Collaborative learning, therefore, is the ultimate, where now you're bringing in peer support, group work, think, pair, and share to support social interaction and knowledge sharing. The learner learns from each other, helping to build the confidence they all need in the ever-changing world. And most importantly, you must remember to give feedback. Providing timely feedback and constructive feedback guides the learner towards Kaizen approach to improvement, or what we call continuous improvement. Is what we call inquiry-based learning. In this approach, you as the teacher, you present an issue or a question and guides the learner through exploring and uncovering knowledge to find solutions. The learner is active participant and he builds his or her understanding following his or her curiosity. So what is your role as a teacher in inquiry-based learning? You as a teacher, you have a role to support and guide the learner, facilitating the learning journey rather than just providing direct answers. You will need to encourage the learner to think critically and independently. For example, if you are teaching a science lesson on plants, you will present the question like, what do plants need to grow? This is a key inquiry question. What approach do you think you might want the learner to explore by planting a seed and observing the seed grow? The learner should therefore be able to document this maybe in a journal and say and state the changes that the plant is undergoing as it is growing. Prepare some schedules, let's say watering schedules. I'll be watering the plant in the morning and in the evening, and observe probably maybe how light affects the plant as it grows. This builds an understanding of the plant needs through a hands-on inquiry. Water, it needs manure, it needs weeding and all that. Let the learner do it and see it happen. That's the one aspect of what we call inquiry-based approach. If you're a social studies teacher, for example, and you're teaching a lesson about community helpers, for example, you as a teacher, you might want to pose this question. How do different people help in our community? The approach will look something like this. Let the learner interview or role play as a community helper. If it's a teacher, role play. If it's a doctor, role play. If it is Eva Mamboga, let them role play that. They can also interview people like firefighters, teachers, doctors, and explore each role's importance. You see, this hands-on exploration, and this is one thing I like about CBC, is because it has now taken the knowledge from the teacher as the only subject matter expert here to now having the learner take control of what they want to learn through such things as role playing, through such things like hands-on activities. And this is basically the epitome of competence-based curriculum. So what are the benefits of this inquiry-based learning? It encourages curiosity, where the learners explore topics deeply, driven by their own questions. It also develops independence, building essential skills for working independently and collaboratively. That aside, you can have all these key techniques that you have looked at, the four of them, but there comes a challenge, especially for public schools, where you have one teacher handling 80 to 90 pupils in one class. What are the risks? What are the challenges? And I want you to reflect on this. How do you handle large classes and students' behavior? I know we have all been there, especially our early grades teachers who are here today. We have bloated classrooms. So think of it. What are these challenges? You are the person on the ground dealing with those 90 tiny humans. What challenges do you face while handling these large classes? Kindly use the chat section to share your responses as I take a water break. Irene Courier says monitoring reading, especially during English. Less concentration due to poor class management. That's Alice Mushiri. Class control, lack of enough learning materials. Time consuming, inadequate time to meet the needs of all the learners. Lack of teaching aids. That's from Fatma. Margarita says reaching out to individual learners is a challenge, and class control and also marking. It becomes difficult to attend individual learners' differences. That is John. Monica Ngari says the class control, not good. Bonventure War, controlling the class challenges. Time taking from Lucy Modoni. Keep them coming. Quite a number of them coming in. Irene Juki says lack of class control and time consuming. Bule Ahmed says lack of concentration, lack of materials. A lot of time is taken. Class control is poor. Mary Wangombe, needs of all students are not met. Individualized teaching is a challenge. That is from Joyce. Charles Ouma says we also experience challenges with very low classes in hearing impaired schools. Okay. These are special needs learning, special needs education. I think this is something interesting. Charles Ouma, we can reach out later on. We have a discussion around this. I have an interest in learners with disability. Not giving a lot of exercises due to colleagues. All this you are saying are the real pain points that teachers have to grapple with large classes. But as teachers, we might fail to provide individual attention to the learners. Difficulty, as you've mentioned, in maintaining order, class management, difficulty in assessment and feedback, lack of space and resources can also limit class reorganization. For example, if you wanted to do group work and you have a class of 90, you, the teacher, do not even have a space to walk. You are stuck in one corner there, dictating from there because the class is small. So you might not even reorganize your class and you cannot maintain a student engaged. But as teachers, we can attempt to mitigate these negative effects by adopting strategies that we know are good for our students' learning and generally good for speaking to large groups. Some of these things that we may work on as teachers to help us meet as many learners as possible. One is by treating the class as a collection of small groups. You can break the class into small subgroups. I remember in my former school where I schooled, the school was so big until it had the chief headmaster and we had the lower primary head teacher, we had the upper primary head teacher and several deputies. This helped us to the bigger group as in terms of small group, breaking the class into smaller subgroups for certain activities. For example, you could have a reading group, a writing group, and a hands-on group where the learners rotate every 10 to 15 minutes. This approach helps us to maintain engagement and makes it easier to manage classroom behavior. For instance, let's say you have a reading or a phonics class or lesson, and each group can work with different letter sounds or practice reading aloud with a pattern. Another approach you can use, you can start with problem-solving questions. Begin each lesson with a question or a simple problem that students can discuss in pairs or small groups. For example, if you're a math teacher, you could present a real-life scenario such as sharing apples among friends and ask the learners to come up with possible solutions. You see, this gets them involved and encourages critical thinking while connecting the lesson with everyday life. You can also switch up activities every 10 to 15 minutes, for example, where young learners, are often have short attention spans. So you need to switch up activities regularly, where you use interactive methods like storytelling, games, or songs related to lesson content. A snap view, you could, in a snapshot, you could probably, let's say after a brief on math explanation, you can switch to a group counting game, followed by a short video if you have tablets or those learning devices, and then finish up with a hands-on worksheet, for example. This keeps the lesson lively. Previous slides. You can also use scaffolded assessments with practical scenarios. Break the assessments into smaller connected tasks that help students to build confidence. An example here will be, let's say in a science lesson or a unit, you can start with simple drawing exercise, like let's say drawing a plant, and then move to label the parts, and finally have them describe what each part does. What is the role of the roots? What is the role of the stem? What is the role of the leaves? You see, these structured tasks will help the learner to understand gradually without feeling overwhelmed, and thus making assessment a constructive learning experience. You also need to be willing to experiment and have fun. You as a teacher, don't hesitate to try new activities or methods. Be innovative. For example, if a class enjoys singing, incorporate learning songs to reinforce concepts like the alphabet or days of the week. If a hands-on activity seems to work, explore ways to add similar ones in future lessons. You see, when you try different strategies, you can make teaching more enjoyable and help yourself to find what works best for your students. That's what it all means, being an innovative teacher. You also need to stay positive and accommodate different learning speeds. Remember that every student progresses at their own pace. On Monday, I said, you can never design a lesson for an average learner. Every learner is unique in his own way. So there is no one blanket fits all. So you could provide things like early finishers with the fun extension activities and like drawing or puzzles, while offering extra support to those who need more time. Always staying positive and accommodating different needs will always foster supportive, inclusive classroom environment where your learners feel valued and motivated to learn. But these students can be cheeky at times. You have your own baggage, and students are very cheeky in class, especially when we have very large classes. What must you do, or what should you do? Always be attentive and keen to observe and monitor. Regular assessment on both academic performance and behavior in class and group settings helps to identify patterns or concerns. You also need to build a sense of trust and listening by developing a supportive professional relationship with your learners. That mutual trust will always foster open communication. So you need to listen carefully to understand their perspectives. Always discuss behavior impact. Help your learners understand how their behavior affects others and themselves, encouraging empathy and self-reflection. More importantly, engage with the parents. Always maintain that contact with parents to gain insights into possible causes of behavior issues and to ensure a consistent support mechanism to this child. And above all, foster self-confidence by working in building your learners' self-esteem and promoting a positive self-image through encouragement and reinforcement. Encouragement and reinforcement. That's why I said yesterday, teachers wear many hats. You are a parent, you are a counselor, you are a teacher, you are a disciplinarian, you are the cook, you do everything. But all this, you can never be paid for. If there was a salary to be given to a teacher, it can't match any of the work that you do as a teacher. Finally, you need to reinforce positive behavior. Giving positive feedback for good behavior and avoiding giving undue attention to misbehavior will always ensure that this child will always remember you as a teacher who helped to shape their future. A story is told of this child when they were in early grade 2. He stole a watch and went to the teacher. The teacher had a way of finding the watch. He had an option of checking all the learners in open. But this teacher was innovative enough, and he told all the learners to come face the board, line up, and close their eyes, their hands up. And the teacher went from pocket to pocket to pocket. He found the watch in one of the child's pocket. The teacher picked the watch and kept it in his own pocket and continued to search until all the learners had been searched. And he told the learners, "You can now sit down and open your eyes. Voila, here is the watch." The wisdom that teacher had, he never exposed this learner who had taken the watch. But many years later, this learner still remembered that. And this learner went on to become a very senior person in the country. And he looked for that teacher in retirement and thanked the teacher and told the teacher. The teacher could not even remember that story. That was in grade 2. So you as a teacher, you have a duty to protect and guide. Instead of exposing the learner, you can crush a learner and that learner will never be the same again. But when you correct the learner in a more positive way, the learner cherishes that and they keep remembering that. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, you need to set priorities. Focus on addressing 1 or 2 behavior issues at a time. You cannot be the prioritize. You can't address all the challenges at once. Refer serious or ongoing cases to guiding and counseling teachers for additional support. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of today's session. I hope you have gained much. You have gained something that you can implement in your class. But before we go, we have an assignment. And this assignment shall be done on our WhatsApp chat, the one Vida shared with you yesterday. So if you can quickly go there, if you can quickly go to the Angaza Elimu platform. On the Angaza Elimu WhatsApp tool, you will need to choose a resource you would wish to access. That is, choose teacher training, not lesson plan. This time we are choosing teacher training. I hope you're all there. Remember the chatbot we were using yesterday? I just want to guide you on what to do. Once you've chosen teacher training, you need to select an area of the session task. Today is on Wednesday. We are doing session number 3, which is lesson delivery. So I want you to choose lesson delivery. And once you choose lesson delivery, there are prompts that will come just to gauge your understanding of today's session. So answer those prompts in the best way possible. There are no correct or wrong answers. You are the professional. So give your opinion as you best fit. I hope I'm clear on how to go about today's task. Go to the Angaza Elimu WhatsApp tool, choose a resource you would wish to access, and in that case, choose the teacher training, not the lesson planning. Then select on area of session task. Today is Wednesday. We are doing lesson delivery. So choose on that and then answer the subsequent prompts that will come on your WhatsApp. And by that, you'll have submitted your assignment for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It was an honor to be with you for this 1 hour, 20 minutes or so. I leave you with that quote. Effective teaching is not about covering the content, but uncovering the understanding. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vida. If there are any reactions, concerns, or questions, I could quickly take